here's Frank, Scott, Chris, and Adam.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a bonus edition of Fantasy Baseball today. Here to recap the first round of the MLB draft for those in Dynasty leagues, or maybe those in redraft who just want to familiarize themselves with the future stars of the game. Frank Stanfield here. And if we're talking prospects, I had to bring in my guy. You know him very well. Used to host this very podcast, host of everything in this league, and of course, crushing it on Prospect One, his Prospect podcast, which you need to listen to. It's Chris Welsh, aka the Welsh. What is going on, my friend? It's a very busy time for you.
It's crazy time. What's up, my friend? It's good. It's draft time. We're like literally recording this as the draft is going on, and it was super cool for baseball to be like, hey, it'd be fun. Let's not let anybody shine, and let's have the futures game, and let's just throw the draft in together so nobody can really talk about anything. Poor futures game. Brennan Davis, winning the MVP, having 2 homers. Nobody cares because of the craziness of the draft. I don't really blame them. I was pretty stoked about it. There was some awesome stuff that happened in the first round. Big implications, but nothing like a draft starting on a Sunday and going into a Monday morning. That's what I've always said, Frank. It's the best way to do it.
MLB, man, they just can't get out of their own way, right? Shooting themselves in the foot. They're putting on the futures game while one of the biggest soccer games of the year is going on, like the Euro Cup final. I'm trying to balance like 8 different screens at once. I'm watching the Yankees. I'm watching the futures game. I'm watching soccer. There's all this stuff going on. NBA finals, MLB draft is just, oh my gosh.
I didn't even mention that. There's a good placement of having the draft like right with the NBA finals as well. The only good thing that came out of that, and I hope it was a reactionary to all that stuff, was like Manfred getting booed was just like, inject that into my veins. Like he couldn't even get his words out as he was trying to open up the draft because he kept getting booed and he was looking at people. And I just wanted him to be like, shut up there. Like we need to be like, you giving the look like, hey, why am I getting booed? You know exactly why you're getting booed. But that was that was one of the few really, really big positive, pleasant things that happened during the draft. But there's much more, and we'll talk about all the guys.
Yeah, it's like, dude, just embrace it at this point, right?
Exactly. That's exactly my point. That's what I'm trying to get across. I probably didn't say properly. Is it's like Goodell just has embraced it.
Oh yeah,
be the bad guy. Breaking news, Manfred. You're the bad guy. You're the heel of baseball. Don't you think you're the face? You think you're a baby face? You're not a baby face. Adam Silver is the baby face of commissioners. You're the heel, and you need to embrace it. Don't stop. Be like, hey, why are you doing that? Because you're ruining baseball, and you put the draft on a Sunday night.
What is the best heel tag team of all time? Because I feel like Rob Manfred and Roger Goodell should just keep up at this point.
Give them the world title. Give them the world tag team title championship. Put them in a Hell in the Cell. And I got to tell you, though, I don't know who you'd pair with Adam Silver. What's a good commissioner that anybody thinks about after that? There isn't.
I don't know. We'll have to find like a fantasy commissioner somewhere or something like that. Like, who's the best fantasy commissioner you could think of? We'll figure it out.
Scott White. You're playing Scott White. He's got the Scott White League. We'll do Scott White and Adam Silver versus Goodell and Manfred. I love it.
I am here for it. Let's talk some MLB draft. That's what we're here to do, right? For the second time in 3 years, a college catcher was selected first overall, with Henry Davis going to the Pittsburgh Pirates this past season. Hit .370 with 15 homers, 10 steals in 50 games at Louisville. And just wanted to figure out, Welsh, where does he stack up against the game's top offensive catcher prospects like Adley Rutschman, like a Francisco Alvarez with the Mets, who we also saw hit a home run in the futures game? Where does he stack up against those guys, and what does the projectable skill set look like for someone like Henry Davis?
Henry,
for him to turn into like a JT Realmuto based on some of that speed?
That's a really good comp. That's a really good comp. Henry Davis is one of those guys that I did watch a ton of this year. And he's impressive on all fronts. He's always making contact. He's got just good, pure, raw power. Kind of has like a lower center of gravity that he gets under it. He does the like no batting gloves thing, which I just personally hate and I can't get over sometimes. But he's a stud. He's an absolute stud. And I think what you just said is like the main question. Adley is his own tier. Francisco Alvarez really has established himself as like the no-brainer number 2, just big, pure, raw power as well. Henry Davis is probably in that tier with him. And I think Joey Bart was kind of one of those lines. My initial placement in fantasy for a first-year player is he's not a top 5 pick, even though he was the number 1 overall pick. He's not a top 5 in first-year player for a couple reasons. He's a catcher. He's not Adley Rutschman. I think there's an argument that you can get him there if you'd like, maybe 5. But, offensive skill sets, he's going to steal, he's going to hit, he's going to probably hit for decent power. And I think he could definitely even be a number 2, but I think he's like a 3 or 4 hitter. That's what he was doing at Louisville. I've got him right around the top 60 overall on my fantasy list, but right outside the top 5 comparative to this class. So it's going to be one of those things that it confuses people where you see how high a guy goes and you're like, well, is that the top guy I take? No. And that's also one of the big reasons why one of my missions and what I do with Prospect One and my list and everything is to talk to people with this based on fantasy, because I did it for years and years and years and it's not a bad thing. You go to MLB Pipeline or you go to Baseball America and you check out their lists and you see, and you're like, okay, and this gives you relative stuff, but those are not built for fantasy. Those are built for real life. Defense is a heavy piece that's put into it. They might weight a guy, an outfielder who's got a great offensive potential, but he's starting not look like he could play center field, so they ding him a little bit. So I'm trying to fix that and talk about it from a pure fantasy based standpoint. So when you see a guy go 1-1, you're like, oh, this is a top guy I got to take. It's not. If you play in a 2-catcher league, he's more valuable. If you play in points leagues, there's pitchers that move up, and if you're just playing roto head-to-head stuff, there's a lot of high-end potential in some of these shortstops. So it was an underslot pick. They're obviously looking to save on day 2. I can tell you, you'll see why and who they saved on. They took Anthony Solomito, who wants a lot of money, and he's going to be a hard sign. So I think they obviously underslot Henry Davis. The pick was like a $2 million pick. It's probably going to take 2.5 or 2.7 or something to get Solomito. So that was kind of the repercussion of what they did, was to get a really good young high school pitcher that they would be able to sign. And Henry Davis is a great real life cornerstone, but for fantasy, not top 5.
Yeah, I think a bunch of good points there that I want to hit on, and something that I'm kind of learning here, because I've never really admittedly paid all that much attention to the MLB draft, is that there's like a lot of politics and stuff that go into like these draft picks and we're going to spend less on our first round pick so that we can get a better second round pick. Like, it's all very interesting from just like a pure baseball and MLB draft perspective. But what you said about prospect lists and guys that are drafted early in the actual MLB draft, and how they don't necessarily need to go as early in first year player drafts, I think is paramount, because again, like, they're factoring in defense a lot of the times, obviously, when drafting these prospects in the MLB draft. And it's like similar to something like Christian Pache, right? Who has been ranked super high on a bunch of prospect lists for a long time, but it's mostly for his defense. Like, maybe the offensive game comes around eventually. Completely different player, obviously, from Henry Davis. But I thought that it was, what you're saying there makes a ton of sense. Just sticking with Henry Davis for a second, proximity. What are you thinking? A fast mover here throughout the minor leagues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump up to one of the questions we're going to talk about, but yeah, one of the fastest, I think, Henry Davis is. And he, like I said, he's great for this team because they've got guys like Quinn Priester and Roansy Contreras, who is going to be in the futures game. They've got some good pitchers. They need someone they can build around. And they haven't had a guy since Neil Walker, actually, who I think gave the pick for them. Neil Walker came up as a catcher. Tony Sanchez, maybe. They just haven't had a really good crew or a good catcher to build up through the system. And that's a guy. Henry Davis is, I think, kind of one of those quiet leaders, and team rallies around him, and he was a Louisville guy. So yeah, it's a solid pick for an organization. But like I said, just being able to weigh through that, Heston Kjerstad was tough for people because he went 2 overall last year to Baltimore, and he had big power, and everyone's like, oh, I take him the 3rd, and it's like, no, you don't. You don't take him in the top 10, and that's what is so uniquely different about these. Is like, there are guys that went in the teens. There's a guy in the teens I have at number 2 overall on my first year player. So there's a balance that's going to flow through all of this, and crazy stuff is going on. Guys are saving the money, and the politics of it at the second pick. We'll talk about it with it, but the Jack Leiter was threatening. Rumor was threatening to not sign, and people are calling bluffs. Baseball drafts are they're a whole nother beast. But Henry Davis won one. It's a really great pick for the organization. For fantasy, it's okay. It's okay.
All right, Jack Leiter, we will get to him in just a second. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Lets you know when we go live or we drop a new video like this one. Let's talk about those Vandy boys. Jack Leiter goes second overall to the Texas Rangers, and Kumar Rocker slips to 10 with the New York Mets. And we were talking beforehand, the possibility of seeing Jacob deGrom and Kumar Rocker in the same rotation is just amazing, and it could be so fun.
Imagine Kumar also in DeGrom's ear and be like, so how do you throw that? Imagine him improving the slider and picking up stuff. It's nutso to me, Kumar with the Mets.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point too. And I talked about this with for redraft leagues with Joe Musgrove when he joined the Padres. I was like, look, he's hanging out now with Darvish and Blake Snell. Totally. He's going to learn things from these guys. And so far for the most part, Joe Musgrove has had that breakout season. So it's a good point that you bring up there with Kumar Rocker. Look, both of these guys are electric. Leiter with his fastball. Yeah. Rocker has that ridiculous slider. Is it a slam dunk, Welsh, that Leiter should go over Rocker in first-year player drafts? I know that there are some question marks with Rocker, but I personally trust the Mets development staff more so than I do the Texas Rangers. Or should that not matter?
That's an interesting way to put it. Actually, I was on doing a live feed when Kumar got picked, and I love the landing spot. I love the Mets landing spot. It's the Mets way. Draft pitching, sign hitting. That's what they do. That's what they've been doing for a while, and it's a good recipe. And I think the Mets have done a decent job of developing pitchers and picking the right guys. They got JT Ginn, and they've got Matthew Allen, who had Tommy John surgery, Kumar Rocker. They got a stable of dudes that are coming, and they're coming pretty quick. And it's a good spot for Kumar. But Leiter to me has always been the clear-cut guy. I have both of these guys in a general range of each other. I don't love to go crazy high on pitching, but I've got Jack Leiter inside my top 3, and I've got Kumar inside the top 5. So, my 5 for first-year player is pretty locked. And that's why when I say guys like Henry Davis and stuff, I just don't see, and there's a couple other landing spots of some draft picks that were intriguing. I just don't see how I'm going to adjust my top 5. Leiter in the draft, there's this rumor going around that he was asking for $10 million. Again, it's a rumor. And he, for teams not to draft him so the Red Sox could get him. And then the Rangers kind of called that bluff and picked him up. And they've done it. They do a decent job as far as developing. They don't have any just, if you will, bangers of pitchers. Cole Winn did start the futures game, but Leiter's going to come in and he's going to be a beast. He is electric fastball. He's got some good secondary stuff. The Rangers are going to have to work with him on making sure that he doesn't only live off that fastball, because he's not going to be able to just 80% fastball when he gets into the majors or anything like that. Again, he's going to have to continue working on adjustments, but he's the guy. I've got him at number 3 overall on my first year player. And I would be willing. If I was in a points league, I'd probably take him 1, to be honest with you. I wouldn't even worry about the young shortstops. I would just go in on pitching, and Kumar's right there. And it's a steal. I personally would have loved to see the Diamondbacks take him. It's 2 pitches. The only thing that I'm sitting with is to let Kumar fall. And to not only let him fall, you had 2 pitchers that I was surprised went ahead of him. You had Mazzucato, which was an utter shock, a high school pitcher to the Royals. And then you had Bachman go in front of him. That's a college and a high school, another college and high school pitchers. That's 2 high school, 2 college pitchers that went ahead of him. What is scaring off the teams? Because he's got 2 electric pitches. The fastball slider combo is crazy, but do they really believe he's not going to develop anything else? I talked to him 3 years ago, and you can hear it on Prospect One, and we were talking about the development of a changeup, which I think a team can start to implement. He started throwing a cutter. What is it? Is there really big relief risk that made teams go, safety, I think, over the upside of Kumar Rocker, who's also a team leader. So I think there's some little questions out there that maybe the risk reward isn't worth it, and you just go solid with Leiter. But the 2 great picks, and it's a decent pitching fantasy season if that's what you're looking for your first year player drafts.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of over-analysis too for Kumar Rocker, right? He's been in the limelight for a long time now, right? People talking about him as the 1-1 for a while now, and he's finally coming out. And I think we just have so much footage and analysis from people that they're kind of just over analyzing every single thing that he does at this point. So,
and to that point, there's this element that happens. So an episode I just did on Prospect One, I had Jim Callis on from MLB, and we were talking about the MLB Combine. They just added the Combine. And is this a new thing? And I was trying to poke and be like, hey, did this guy do this? Did anybody help their stock? And Jim kind of hit a point that I think works with baseball negatively, is he's like, there's nothing anybody could do that's going to change anyone's mind. And that's like baseball in a nutshell right there. Is, you get scouts, you get people that go, they see a kid, they see the pitches, they see where he's positive, he's negative, and they say, got my report. And there's not much new. And even when there's stuff new, they just go, oh, okay, let's mark that down. He did like start adding this. We'll see if that works. But no one changes anything. It's stuck in their ways more than anything else. And when Jim said that, it was, to me, the classic word right there. Then why even have the combine? If no one is willing to change their mind whatsoever, should you change your mind on like a guy running, like in the football, like running in shorts and stuff? Maybe not, but still, like if everyone's so stuck in their ways, the book could have been out on Kumar last year. No one's willing to make any adjustments on it. And then people just move on and they don't, recheck in with a kid and how are those extra pitches going? Was that done in conversation? It's ad nauseum week ago, but Kumar Rocker, he's a total stud. I think he's going to move decently through systems because he can go deep into games. And as long as he develops, outside of that slider, like a third really good pitch, I think he can move pretty quick, and it's a steal for the Mets.
All right, let's move on to another pitcher that was drafted inside of the top 3 picks. And you mentioned his name about a month ago when we were talking MLB draft prospects. High school pitcher Jackson Jobe goes 3rd overall to the Detroit Tigers. And prospects are hard enough to project. We know that at this point. But high school pitchers are probably the hardest because you're talking about an 18-year-old where anything can happen in the next 3 to 4 years. Yeah. You can do that for like any prospect, but specifically for pitchers, it's pretty tough to project. Jackson Jobe, Welsh, how does he rank for you compared to Leiter and Rocker? Obviously, if you plan on taking him in first-year player drafts, you're going to be waiting a while.
You're going to be waiting a while, but he is one of those pitchers that, from a high school perspective, that could really, really move. He's the spin guy. If anybody heard, he registered like a 3,000 on his fastball. Yeah. So and this is a high school kid with 3+ pitches. Some would argue that, he might already, regardless of college or high school, have the best fastball and slider combo. So, you got 2 of the best pitches, you've got really good command, easy delivery, and crazy spin. It's everything to love. It's on the lines of like, it reminds me of like Mackenzie Gore, not in that they're the same, is in that like when Mackenzie Gore got drafted, it was kind of like, well, regardless of, who else is out there, Gore is high. This is next level. Jobe is on that run. I know Tigers fans not happy. Shout out to my boy, Paul Sporer, who I know is very upset because you're passing up on dudes.
I saw that.
Dudes. So, but I think this is a couple things. And I think this was the Marcelo Mayer fallout was the next 2 teams, the Rangers. I had received word that the Rangers weren't even considering Mayer. It was either going to be Leiter or Kumar Rocker. That's what I had heard. And if they got scared about that price, then they would have gone Kumar Rocker at 2. So the fallout of Mayer is like that the next 2 teams already had made their decisions. And I think the Tigers had already made their decision. They fell in love with Jobe. It's hilarious. They just keep taking pitching, but they got a high school kid that they can develop through the system. They're probably going to save a little bit of money. And they already on day 2 took a kid that I absolutely love. And Isaac Pacheco, who's big Texas kid, huge power, third baseman, high school, that might need a little bit of over slot because he was a potential 1st-round pick. So I think they're doing well. It's gonna hurt for Tigers fans that they took a high school pitcher over Kumar, over the shortstops or whatever it is, but they were able to do some damage in the 2nd round as well. And Jobe is, he's a dude. I had been asking a lot of people. I'd done a debate episode on Prospect One where it was like asking industry guys, Mick Abel, who went last year, versus Jackson Jobe, and who would you take? And it was split, and it ended up being Mick Abel by just like a hair. So that's about the relative range. So he's like a top 75 overall prospect, and I've got him, what did I tell you? I believe 8 on my first-year player draft. Yeah, he is 8, right behind Henry Davis. And I think that actually kind of ends a little bit of a tier of value after Jackson Jobe, of like, the top 8 guys are kind of the core, and Jobe is the end of that.
All right, let's take a look at that quartet of prep shortstops. You already mentioned one of the names there, Marcelo Mayer, who went 4th overall to the Boston Red Sox. Admittedly, everyone knows I'm a Yankee fan. Not the greatest day, for being honest.
You weren't happy.
Marcelo Mayer landing to the Red Sox and then Kumar Rocker to the Mets. Just like, all right, well, I'm going to shut this off. I'm going to go do something else. Mayer goes to the Red Sox 4th overall. Jordan Lawler to your Arizona Diamondbacks 6th overall. Brady House to the Nats at 11. and Khalil Watson to the Marlins all the way down at 16. All four of these, I think, could represent, there's a long time before we see them play, the biggest values in the first round. Give us some strengths on each guy here between Mayer and Lawler and House and Watson, and maybe why. Why did someone like Watson fall as far as he did?
So with Watson, Watson didn't require the big money. There could be a size issue that's there. Marcelo Mayer represented floor. Lawler represented upside power, impact power. Brady House also impact power. And I think people were able to just talk themselves out of Khalil Watson because he wasn't exemplary over any of those other guys while representing a whole lot of skill sets. I wish I had the answer because I'm all in on Khalil Watson. I think he is dynamic. He's like 5'9", like $175, but he represents the best speed. He has a huge bat speed. There's a lot of power that's still to be developed in there. And this isn't like raw, like where Brady House, I think, has a question about his overall hit tool. Khalil doesn't. So I think Khalil is like a 5-tool player, and I got him at number 2 on my first year player. So I think it's a steal for the Marlins. And this is what I'm saying. Like, this is the mental game people are going to have to figure out, because if you see Khalil Watson at 16 and you're following like what Pipeline or whoever is doing, he might be the end of a first year player draft. And, he might go like 5 or 6 in others, but he really shouldn't be that much further down. He's a big impact player. Mayer is still so interesting. I started to, build scenarios where this would happen yesterday, and then it did. And it's really funny. Off air, we were talking about just like the second round, and I mentioned a player, and I said there's one guy in the second round that's going to be really interesting to watch, because there's some rumors going around that he might return to Florida, and it's Jud Fabian. And I don't need to turn it to this, but like the Red Sox are gifted these situations. Not only did they take Marcelo Mayer, but I said, look out, if Fabian goes early in the second round, that means the team is going to overpay. And they took Jud Fabian. So the Red Sox are having, I think, a banging first couple days, because they got,
Don't say that, Welsh.
It's just, and also, one thing I was like stewing on here is I have got 4 Red Sox inside my top 30 overall prospects.
Wow.
4 right now. That's how well they're doing. And what's so great about Mayer is they probably don't have to, overpay, because as a high school kid, he's not going to not sign. So they might even be able to cut a tiny bit of a deal, overpay for Fabian. And Mayer represented everything. He represents the floor, good hit tool, good power. He can run a bit, good defender. He doesn't have the discrepancies that some of these other guys have. Jordan Lawler, who I absolutely love, the king, Jordan Lawler, I'm going to call him. He is a big power guy, might be one of the best just raw power players in here. Little swing and miss. Brady House, even bigger power, but more swing and miss and contact issues. I rank them Mayer, Watson, Lawler, and then the next tier is Brady House. Interesting landing spots, but Lawler's a great landing spot. Mayer, really all but House is just weird. I'm just not a big House guy going to Washington, but I love what Miami is going to be able to do with Watson, and you can put him in, side by side with Jazz. Lawler is going to be a huge impact, and Mayer is just a collection of what probably might be the Red Sox walking out with one of the best drafts, at least based, I think, on the first couple rounds. So
you said you're not a big house guy. You live in an apartment, or?
Yeah. I'm a condo guy. I'm more of a Brady condo guy. That's where I'm looking for. Yeah. Brady House. He's just this big luggy dude. And, they think he can play shortstop still. And it could, I actually was speculating like, boy, what if you put him in Colorado and this could be like Troy Tulowitzki all over again, but there's just like hit issues. And, for all of the upside and offense that was talked about, he fell out of the top 10 and it didn't seem like that was a possibility. Where Khalil was, it's just, he was really establishing his name up with these guys where House was already there. It's kind of like Kumar dropping to 10. It's like, well, what was scaring the teams off? Why were teams moving away from, if you really think this is this cornerstone of 4 impact shortstops, why did Brady House fall off like that? Why did Khalil Watson? You could say the same thing. But I think House is more nefarious than like Khalil Watson. I think there's some real contact issues where I know the Diamondbacks were just elated to get Jordan Lawler, as they should have been.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah. And I'm 100% just being a hater. If you're a Red Sox fan, you should feel very good about what they're doing so far in this draft and just the prospects they already have in their organization between Tristan Casas and Jeter Downs. There's a lot to be excited about.
Jarren Duran. I mean, Jarren Duran could be any day. That's the big one. And now they just added freaking Judd Fabian, which, there's some issues there on Fabian. I mean, this was a number. I don't mean to jump into him because we got other stuff, but Fabian was like, at one time was talked about as like maybe a first overall pick, especially because this is a college bat. He had probably the best pure raw power, and he struggled at the beginning of this year. And then he had a swing change, and he started shortening up. He started making contact again. He got his batting average up, and he was hitting bombs. And this is a situation where, I mean, God, you put him in Boston, and if they can keep going with that swing change, this is a steal. And this is a huge impact player. And I mean, you want to talk about the Boston's not afraid to go with buzzy guys. They got Blaze Jordan last year, who was like an internet star. Now they got Judd Fabian and Marcelo Mayer. Boston's nuts right now with what they're doing in their system. They just need pitching. I'm surprised they keep going hitting. They really need to stack up on some pitchers, but offensively, they're doing very well.
All right, well, so let's give people a little peek behind the curtain. And you've already alluded to some of your first-year player draft rankings, but if we're just talking about the names that we've mentioned to this point, Henry Davis, Jack Leiter, Kumar Rocker, Jackson Jobe, Marcelo Mayer, Jordan Lawler, Brady House, Khalil Watson.
Yes.
How are you ranking that group of 8 for player drafts?
So Marcelo Mayer is still going to be 1, even though he was taking 4th. Like I said, he is a high contact guy, just represents all the tools. By the way, if you watch the draft, did you watch it? How much of the draft did you get to catch?
I watched a good amount of it, and I was watching the MLB Network feed, and I think it was Marcelo Mayer who they compared to. They were like, "Oh, he's like Cal Ripken and Chipper Jones combined." I'm like, "Come on."
Yeah, Brian Reynolds. Yeah, that's a classic thing. He's like the Terminator and Jesus Christ. He's amazing. But Mayer looks like Vincent Chase. He's Entourage. That needs to be his nickname in Boston. He looks. I mean, you remember Entourage? He looked like Vincent Chase.
Very nice.
Like identical. It was crazy. I was like, "Are you going to be Aquaman?" Marcelo Mayer, though, he's the top guy. There's floor. Does he have as much power upside as Lawler? Maybe not. Or House? Does he have as much speed upside as Watson? No, but I think he's like the best floored player across the board. I've heard Corey Seager comps. I think Xander Bogaerts actually might be a decent comp. I think the power or the speed kind of dwindles a little bit, but Mayer's number 1. Khalil Watson is 2. Jack Leiter is 3. And Leiter you could move if you're, like I said, in a pitching heavy. I would be willing to go 1 on Jack Leiter. Jordan Lawler I have at 4 and Kumar Rocker at 5. So that's like a tier. And I don't truly believe one of those guys is like, if you were to take Kumar Rocker with your first overall pick and a first-year player, that you deserve to be screamed at. Because I just think that's a tier of players that we'll see where the separators are. 2 of those guys are going to come out here to Arizona. And I'm assuming Leiter is going to come over here to complex level to start, and Jordan Lawler do the same thing. And I'm going to try to see them and catch up, and maybe I'll get some eyes. Maybe I don't know if Jack Leiter will pitch this year. Lawler should play, and I should get some eyes on them. And maybe as we get to see some of these guys in whatever, if it's complex league or it's low A, and we'll start to change our minds, because that's the big thing. If you start to look at these guys the minute they get drafted to how the year finishes, stuff changes. That's the core. The next grouping for me goes Kumar, Brady House, and Henry Davis. So that is how my top 8 of the players we've talked about fare. Jobe at the end, Mayer at the top.
All right. Is there any names that we haven't mentioned that deserve to be ahead of these guys for first-year player drafts? Or is this is this how you have your ranking set up with this top 8?
So I gave you that's my first-year player rank for fantasy, except there's 2 things I'll point out. I love Harry Ford, who went to Seattle. I had him at 9. I love this kid, 5 foot 10, 11, 200-pound catcher who I think can play in other spots, athletic, big, impactful bat. But a guy that it's going to be hard not to push above him is Benny Montgomery, who went in. If you want to talk about scenarios of like, what's the best scenario you could have for fantasy? It might have been Brady House in Colorado. Next might be Benny Montgomery. And Benny Montgomery is like, raw power. He's got big speeds, big 6'4" kid. He's actually super like Zach Veen, who they took last year. But he just might be a better offensive player. And he goes to Colorado with all that offense. That's a guy that's going to be really tough to not jump. And especially if he comes out a little bit hot and he plays some complex level, I could see Benny Montgomery, as I'm staring at my list here, I could see him getting up to 5 or 6 or something like that, just based off just like Zach Veen did for people. Some people had him at like 2 overall. I think Montgomery is someone that everyone's going to have to pay attention to, because that is a hot destination for a very talented, like 5-tool outfielder who's already just big and ready to go. He's super athletic. I think he has the potential to really rock it.
All right, let's finish up with some superlatives here, Welsh. And if for some of these you choose names that we've already talked about, players, perfectly fine. We'll start here with the best hit tool in the first round. Who you got?
Well, I'm going to go with Marcelo Mayer. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you're going to probably hear a lot of the same names with these, because if those guys represented it differently, they probably, they wouldn't be going in the second round if it was anybody else. But yeah, I would say from a hit tool perspective, Marcelo Mayer is the one that that stands out. At one point, I would have said Matt Mclean, but he really fell off. And I think I'm just kind of looking through here to see. Yeah, see, nobody else is catching me that I want to tell you. I'm going to stick with Marcelo Mayer.
All right, so best in-game power. Who you got there?
From a high school perspective, I definitely am going to still go Jordan Lawler. Jordan Lawler, I think, really is going to be able to tap into it. And this is just a big power swing that's going to play. I think some could argue Brady House, because Brady House might have like more raw power. But I'm going to stick with him. And if you were to go from the first round and go college, I mean, college makes it so much tougher because the college talent is not quite there. From a power perspective, I actually might go with your guy Trey Sweeney. Because there's not that many college bats to choose from. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I mean, it would be Henry Davis, I suppose, now that I'm thinking about it. But a non-Henry Davis guy, I'd go with Trey Sweeney over guys like Sal Frelick and Matt Mclean for power.
Very nice. All right, we get a lefty in Yankee Stadium. That could work out pretty well.
Sure.
The best speed tool here in the first round.
Khalil Watson. Yeah, that one's pretty easy. I mean, some might argue Benny Montgomery as well. Benny Montgomery is right there, but give me Khalil Watson.
All right, so the hitter most likely to become a first-round pick in fantasy, we're going back to Marcelo Mayer?
This is I mean, I think the safe one is Marcelo Mayer. I mean, here's the deal. I think there are the 4 players I would pinpoint, and then I'm proving the point of why one of these guys would come up, is Khalil Watson would be right behind Mayer. That's why I have them at the top 2. Jordan Lawler, because of the impact power. If Jordan Lawler fixes the swing and miss issues that exist, he's going to be a top 15 prospect like tomorrow. That type of stuff. Like that, like with how Christian Robinson was with the Diamondbacks, where it was like, oh, there's just massive power and he's starting to fix it. Like that's this type of guy. Jordan Lawler at one point was good, like becoming the consensus number 1 overall pick. So those 3 guys all have first round talent, but I'd also say Benny Montgomery, a guy in Colorado who can hit and run. This might be shades of old school Charlie Blackmon. If you're going to hit 30 and you're going to steal 20, if you're Trevor Story in the outfield, that's first round talent. So Benny Montgomery is another one of those that I would throw in there.
All right. The pitcher most likely to become a first round pick.
Ooh, Leiter. I mean, that fastball, get out of here. It's an easy Jack Leiter. Jobe would definitely be in there. Jobe has the real potential to be an absolute freak and a stud. And if Mazzucato throws 4 straight no hitters again, then we'll take him in the first round. That's what he did in high school.
Last one here, most likely to make it to the majors first. So if we're looking at proximity here, who you got?
Yeah, I would have to go with Henry Davis. Maybe that's counterintuitive because it's a Pirate and the Pirates just don't do it. But this, how long can this team keep doing this? I think he is ready. I think he's major league ready and he's ready to go. If you want to adjust it some other ways, another one would be maybe Will Bednar with San Francisco, who went 14 overall. He can go deep into games. There's a couple college arms. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, probably the easiest is to say like one of these college arms, they can come in relief and they can maybe a Jordan Wicks or something like that. But I'd say Henry Davis is probably the most pro-ready player right now. And man, if we had seen Kumar go to Texas, I might have said Kumar, because I really believe that kid could just go. So like if you were just asking me and not trying to analyze baseball, I'd say Kumar Rocker could go out right now and he could help in a bullpen if if the Mets were, trying to go for a pennant or something like that. I think that is a possibility, but I'll go with Henry Davis.
Yeah. Kind of similar to how the White Sox brought up Garrett Crochet last year.
And Chris Sale.
Yeah. And Chris Sale. Yeah. They did it with both of those guys. Just imagine Jacob deGrom going 7 and just like turning it over to like Kumar Rocker 7, 8. Like they have Jacob deGrom go 7, Kumar Rocker in the 8th, Edwin Diaz in the 9th. Like good luck, buddy.
That's dumb. It's totally dumb. I mean, I'm not saying they would do that, because there's a lot of innings that he put up last year compared to the year before. But I mean, if there is a kid that can do it, it's Kumar Rocker, especially over a short inning. There's no need for Texas to do it. I would love to see that. It would be such a great story, by the way, for baseball, and what a stud that kid would be to get some confidence doing it. We never see it happen, rarely, at least outside of, like you said, with Crochet. But, that's why it's probably actually safer to go that route and pick one of those type of pitchers and a guy like Kumar Rocker because of that factor of the Pirates. The Pirates hate to push prospects, and that would be the only reason. But you've got the most pro-ready guy versus an organization that doesn't want to. So you're kind of stuck a little bit with where Henry Davis is at. But hey, crazier things have happened in baseball. Maybe we could see a Kumar Rocker dropping that slider and fastball in the 8th inning or something in September. Who knows?
Oh man, that would be so fun. Welsh. Any players that we haven't talked about yet, some favorites of yours that went in the first round, maybe some stuff that's going on in the second round right now, anything that you'd like to talk about? 5th overall pick, Colton Cowser, we haven't talked about at all. He went to the Baltimore Orioles, and they've kind of done this thing the past couple of years where they pull some guys up the board. I don't know if this was like a reach pick or anything, but anything on maybe Colton Cowser or any other favorites of yours in the first round?
I'm not a big Colton Cowser guy. I done a Prospects Live mock where he actually went 5, and this is, that underslot thing that they were attempting to do. And they, it's really interesting. It actually just looks more cheap because I'm looking Baltimore in the second round to Connor Norby, who's a great pick, by the way. He's a college bat who I don't think is going to be over slot. So I just don't understand what they're doing, but hey, he's a big, tall guy who can check into some power and stuff. He's fine. As far as the rest of the first round, Matt Mclean is still a guy to monitor. I still like Matt Mclean and, his offensive output. Sal Frelick, who went to Milwaukee, it's kind of funny because we were comparing him against Garrett Mitchell, and then he goes and plays with the same guy that's there. There's some interesting stuff going on in the second round, some names to watch. I told you Jed Fabian going to Boston, I think, was a big deal, 40th overall. Jaden Hill went to Colorado. That's a guy to watch at Tommy John surgery. He's got he's kind of like a Kumar Rocker light, like a big old slider at LSU, and he just got hurt. Might be a bullpen guy. Dylan Lyle went to Washington. They're actually raking now that you really look at it. Brady House and Lyle is a pretty big steal. And I told you, guy just went, as we're recording this, Wes Koth out of Desert Mountain High School, which is my alma mater, just went 57 to the Chicago White Sox. And Koth is like big power. Big, massive power, high school kid. This is a great pick for them. And then I just noticed also Cardinals Josh Baez was one of my favorite coming into the draft. Athletic outfielder, 6'4", 220, big power. The point of why I'm like throwing out some names, there are going to be some studs that you're going to be able to pick from in the second and third round of first-year player. This isn't the biggest deep draft, but there are some serious upside plays. There's a couple safe college bats, but I mean, you could probably literally pick the college bats on your hand. But the high school guys, there's going to be some big potential. Koth, Lyle, Baez, a couple of those guys already went in the second round. So, keep being on the lookout for it. Everyone's going to be adjusting some stuff. Baez specifically is someone that I would have had if, let's say, you're playing in a 15-team league. He'd be a first rounder for me. And then he just went in the second round. So lots of good talent that's still sitting out there, some guys to go, and first-year players they're going to start forming and developing pretty soon here for everybody.
Very nice. Yeah, remember those names that Welsh just gave you there in the second round, some potential sleepers in your first-year player draft. Again, the Welsh, host of all things in this league, of course, crushing it with the content right now on Prospect One, which is his prospect podcast. You need to be listening to it. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Is It The Welsh? Yes, it is The Welsh.
It is.
Hey, anything else you'd like to promote while you're here?
No, man. I just love doing these stuff. You hit me up and you're just like, Frank's the best. He's like, hey, I'd love to have it. You don't have to do it though. It's all good. I'm like, no, dude, I want to. I've told you, and I would say it here publicly. I love doing shows with you. You and I used to do some smaller hits way back in the day and stuff. I like doing more long form stuff with you. Have a great time doing it. I just appreciate you having me on, talking the stuff. And only thing I'd say is if people want to check out my list, my top 500, I got a Dynasty 300, all that. I got a Patreon, patreon.com/ITL Army. And this week it's going to be updated with the draft guys. Just boom. plotted right on the top 500 list that they could check out, and that would be about it. But yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me talk, and hopefully everybody enjoyed it and has got some names implanted in their brains to get ready to just fleece all of their fantasy teammates in the coming weeks by getting some picks and getting these guys.
Very nice. As always, love having the Welsh on here. We're going to wrap there. For Welsh, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again sometime. Bye-bye.